Thank you again for the invitation. Let me start right away. In the end of 2007, we had one of the greatest economic and financial crises breaking out since the early 1930s, or more precisely, since 1929. It was not a crisis that was characterized by a few people going broke or making entrepreneurial errors, but it was a crisis characterized by a great cluster of errors, by a huge number of people having made erroneous judgments. The symptoms of this crisis were large increases in the number of unemployment, losses of great fortunes, at least fortunes that appear to be big fortunes on paper, bankruptcies, insolvencies of many, many banks, delayed retirement for many people. People thought that they could retire in a year or two, now have to work for another 10 years before they reach this desired end. Reduced inheritances that people received. So what happened was basically an illusion of great wealth, of great fortunes, an illusion clashed with reality and turned out to be just an illusion. Now, who would we expect to have predicted this and possibly prevented something like this? And if we listen to the official propagandists in all countries, of course, the people who were responsible for making correct predictions and warning us and preventing these things from happening, that would have been allegedly, supposedly, the task of central banks, of finance ministers, and of all these super smart economists that appear day in and day out on TV and radio shows. And of course, all the famous macroeconomists teaching at the most famous universities in the world. The interesting thing, however, was none of these people that were supposed to know all of this actually had any idea what was coming and could have warned us or were able to prevent this crisis. Alan Greenspan had no idea that it was coming. At least we never heard any statement from him to this effect. His successor, Bernanke, was equally clueless, or as Randians would say, they showed blank out. Nobel Prize winners who received the Nobel Prize for studying cyclical movements, such as Robert Lucas and Edward Prescott, again, had no clue whatsoever, were completely taken by surprise. Also, leading economists in the Obama administration, like Lawrence Summer, had no idea what was coming. None of them made any correct prediction. Interesting to his credit, we have to say that Paul Krugman did admit that the mainstream profession of economists were completely taken by surprise and had no clue what was coming. But he himself, of course, also had no clue what was coming. At least he admitted what the situation was within the economics profession. The entire cluelessness of the economic profession has been nicely documented by two younger Austrian economists, by Mark Thornton on the one hand, and by Bob Murphy, who wrote a few articles where they just illustrated how little these famous economists knew about what was coming and how wrong they had been in their prediction. Chicago-type economists who lean towards the rational expectations view actually held the view that such a thing as major economic crisis cannot really happen. And if it does happen, it is just something that no one can possibly predict, almost as if it were an accident. For the Keynesian economists who admit that there is something like irrationality in human life, all of these things also were a complete surprise, and they use this now as a reason to do deeper studies into human irrationality in the hope that sometimes in the future we might figure out what causes these types of crises, but at the current moment nobody knows exactly why. Now you would think that if the mainstream economists had no idea what caused the crisis and were taken by complete surprise, that you would not ask them what to do to get out of this crisis. After all, they had no idea. Who would ask somebody for advice? What do we do now? If they just admit, you know, we had no idea what was coming, but this is exactly, of course, what happened. Those people who had just proven that they had not the faintest idea what was happening, those were asked, how do we get out of this problem? And what was their proposal? Again, proposals, of course, were somewhat different from one big shot to another big shot, but by and large, they all came to conclusions something like this. Either we just don't do anything at all, leave the entire structure of central banks and private banks attached to central banks as it is, or we do some slight minor reforms within the current systems and try out what the consequences will be in the future, and demanding for more research money so that next time around we might be a little bit smarter than we were before. So they asked for greater powers to be given to the central bank, greater powers to be given to government and to various supervisory boards and control institutions, because of one thing they were all sure, that is, that it was a crisis of capitalism that had shown itself in this financial crisis. It had nothing to do with a crisis of the current banking and financial system. It was a crisis inherent in the structure of capitalism, and it was partly caused or largely caused by greed. The state, in any case, was the big savior. And of course, one had to have more research money to study these things in greater detail in the future. And on one thing, almost complete agreement existed among all these people who were clueless. The agreement was that that a policy of easy money and credit had to be followed in order to get out of this crisis. Now, it seems to be clear that if you make the proposal in order to get out of this crisis, we have to pursue a policy of easy money and easy credit, then implicitly you must admit that it is, of course, not easy money and easy credit that actually caused this crisis, because if you think that easy money and easy credit caused the crisis, then you obviously would not recommend that you pursue a policy of easy credit and easy money now to get out of it. But in any case, so this is what they all recommended. Whether Keynesians or monetarists, easy money and easy credit was the way out of the crisis.